Hi, Laurence. Welcome to the show. This is the Espresso series, and we're just delighted to have you here. I've got, and Laurence, you're going to have to forgive me if I pronounce your name
That's a
incorrectly.
tricky one. That's a tricky one. Please try. Please try.
Well, I'm going to do my absolute best here, but is it pronounced Mauquoi?
Nee, Mukwa.
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 There we go.
Mukwa.
So,
French. So
Laurent,
first name is Dutch. First name is Laurence, actually Laurence, but you can say Laurence. That's fine. And the last name is Mukwa, which is French. I'm from Belgium.
Laurence Mauquoi. So we've got the great pleasure of having Laurence on the show today. He's the Chief Digital Officer at Nexeye, and he's responsible for driving digital growth across the European retail brands. He also has his own consulting firm, Stratfield Group, where he and his team have led consulting with large companies like Societe Generale, Idealo, and is known for blending strategic precision with creative depth. He's also a published wine author, runs a popular blog, Der Wein Snob, and speaks 6 languages. His academic roots includes a thesis on, of all things, Apocalypse Now, which he earned a very, very high grade. He's a rare polymath, and so I'm delighted to have Laurence on the show. I'm sure I've got something amiss in that introduction.
Well,
So, do you want to?
first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here, I knew it would be a good conversation because you do your research well. There's just one slight mistake. I speak 7 languages, so that's the only thing. And I have to say, I tricked the system. I learned languages which are very similar, so that's how you bump up the numbers. And yeah, I speak Luxembourgish and German, so that's very similar. I speak Dutch and Afrikaans, which is very similar. And obviously, the languages you know. Well, English is one of them, German is one of them, French is one of them, and Italian. So that's it.
Incredible. I think that's almost a separate conversation for another day.
Absolutely, absolutely. Otherwise, it's a rabbit hole.
Lawrence, so walk me through the relationship between marketing and sales and what you would consider that's critical to the successful working relationship of those two important functions within an organization.
The collaboration between marketing and sales is essential and hypercritical for any success of a company. Obviously, there's differences if your business model is B2, B2C, or B2B. And I think let's focus on B2B for that matter, also fitting well the mission of Merlin, and also where actually this collaboration is even more critical. In the end, and of course we can dive into a lot of these details how to make that function. It is critical for the leadership of the company to make sure that sales and actually marketing are working well together. They are all in the same boat. They all have the same goal, which is actually the success of the company. And that is something which needs to be as a baseline of alignment. If that's not there, then obviously there starts a certain competition, which in general already competition within a company is never a good idea.
Yes, I mean, it has reminded me very much of that relationship between the two functions, where essentially that's kind of like the right hand informing the left hand and vice versa, really. So they kind of work together in unison. I want to switch tack ever so slightly, if I may, which is, the role in marketing and what it's supposed to do to sales and vice versa. Could you just spend a little bit of time just kind of, uncorking that a little bit more, like what makes a good marketing function in support of its sales teams?
I think it's good to take also you and the listeners on a journey. So traditionally, and I think that is probably also the mistake then. Traditionally, there was always a separation. So you had say we had marketing in general, which created leads. They said, well, we created a lot of leads, and then they just throw them over to sales, and then sales has to somehow convert those leads. And there's of course a lot of caveats into that story, right? Because on the one hand, marketing will then say, well, we created a lot of leads, we did a great job. On the other hand, sales will say, well, either they are successful, then they will take all the credit for themselves, or the other way around. If it's not successful, they will not look into their own operations and what they could improve. They will actually say that the leads which were provided by marketing are actually crap. And ultimately, you can solve this as a manager in many ways, but the best way to go forward is actually to enhance the roles of both teams. If you look at what you can change on the marketing responsibility is to say, well, you're not only responsible for kind of like a top of the funnel KPIs like leads, because leads can be of a huge array of quality, but obviously move them more to the middle of the funnel as well. Why? Because then the connection where sales starts, kind of like at the middle of the funnel, is then actually there. So there's this disconnect which was there between the lead and then selling to the lead, actually gets smaller and smaller. Aside, of course, with the mission that both actually are responsible for the growth of the company. The one makes people aware of the company, aware of the solutions which the company provides, and the other one actually closes the deal and then nurtures that relationship over time. Now, how we can do that, I can go in a lot of details, of course, but that's the principle where the role of marketing has to change. On the other hand, the role of sales also has to change. Salespeople cannot be today just salespeople. They have to inform marketing about the successes, about things they hear from potential prospects, from customers, so that marketing actually can improve and continue to improve their messaging as well. So it is something which has to be tied in together very, 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 very closely.
So yeah, it's that symbiotic relationship, really. The two kind of coming closer and closer together. I would assume that we're going to witness more of that, particularly as the way technology evolves. But you mentioned something really interesting there about getting into that kind of middle of the funnel stage where sales essentially comes into their own, right? Which then struck me that actually there's a critical process in that entire sales process around discovery, which I would assume that marketing would play an incredibly important role in terms of the kinds of leads and helping them kind of get that right. But just on that discovery, because that tends to influence the flow for the rest of the pipeline.
Absolutely.
So, just kind of in your own thoughts, like what's the process by which you would consider, very good discovery that's important, that you're getting those kind of quality leads going forward? Because I would then assume that once you've done that, that's actually very good intelligence to feed back into the marketing team to then refine that process all over again.
Absolutely. Obviously, so I can go actually in a 4-step approach. Marketing in itself at the beginning is, of course, responsible for the positioning of the company and the positioning of the solution. So what do we do? Which problem do we solve? How do we solve it? That's the basic thing which has to be done, and this has to be consistent across all channels of communication, because every appearance a company has, given, let's say, B2B fairs, the website, the material, everything. That's the baseline, but that's basically branding, right? So that is something which has to be done, and this is based at the beginning of any B2B company, not only on what the tech founders wanted to do, but also actually on a lot of assumptions. And that is the critical, the risk in this. But you have to start with something. That's where marketing starts. But then you're still top of the funnel, right? And then you do some performance stuff, you get some leads in, all fine, but then these leads are not necessarily qualified. Obviously, some of them will, because some people understand your communication right away. They are very good and ready to be sold to, really, really good. But in the end, you need to then, as a marketing team, try to bring that message across in a multi-layer funnel. This can be, let's say, on the one side, you have an education job to do. The education job, let's say outside of sales material, would be to say, okay, you have an ROI calculator, or you have showcases on your website or in your emails, whatever, which actually explain why you guys started out, why it's important, maybe some success stories, whatever. So there's a nurturing there, so that in that second step already, the lead becomes more informed, might not be ready yet to be sold to, but obviously doesn't need a long explanation. This shortens the lead cycle tremendously, right? Because then people already know what do you stand for? Is this something for me? I'm not sure yet. I have some doubts about this and that. And then the salesperson can actually only talk about the this and that instead of everything else. So that is already a huge advantage. Step 2. And then step 3, of course, in this nurturing, marketing also has to support sales, not only with pitch decks, but actually also with case studies. They can tell the story very often much better than certain salespeople, but it's based on, at the beginning, these assumptions, and then, of course, on information the sales team has provided them. And this has to be a cycle. If it's not a cycle, then, to your point, the sales material and the marketing material will never improve. The messaging will never be fine-tuned. And you might think that you solve one problem, but maybe all the prospects care about the other problem, which you actually also solve. Then maybe you should start a conversation with that problem and not with the first one you started out with.
So it's like the marketing also needs to kind of get some degree of insights as well to be able to inform that, so that when they're bringing those leads, through their campaigns, is to kind of almost sharpen that razor blade so that they've got more quality leads coming in for their sales teams. So then just walk me through how you would turn marketing insights into kind of sales discovery questions. Is there a case around that?
Yeah, well, I think there's multiple cases multiple ways you can go about it. On the one hand, of course, marketing works very, very differently than sales. Sales is very often a one-on-one conversation. It is more like an empiric discovery of a person when they saw, well, let's say I try to sell you something, you tell me about something, then I have a learning. But the learning is only from n equals 1, right? So from one person. Ultimately, what marketing can do is provide actually more data behind that discovery. Marketing can do, for instance, surveys with existing leads or with customers to understand basically what are the real needs. But these questionnaires, so these surveys, have to be built on the empiric observations of salespeople, because otherwise it's just a marketing guy or a woman sitting in an ivory tower making up questions which might be completely off point. So this connection again is super important. That's why if I were, let's say, CEO of a B2B company, then I would make sure that my VP marketing, my VP sales actually work very, very closely together and try to plan this collaboration together, and then actually present if I were the CEO, in their jour fixe, so in their one-on-one meetings with me, actually, in that case, present stuff together to me. And that is something where you then also enforce on a personal level a very close collaboration. If you separate them, then there will always be some discussion about, well, we think this, and the other guy says, well, they think this, but I think this. And that is something which is not productive in any way. So in the end, it always is about this cycle. If you break that cycle, then the improvement is gone, and then the collaboration is gone. So it's the trickle-down effect, which is extremely negative. And thus, you have to work together on those insights. You have an observation, you tell me, I'm the marketing guy, I create a survey, I show you the survey beforehand, you have some more observations, because obviously you thought only about the last conversation you had. That's what a salesperson does. And that's even if you ask a salesperson, how are things going? They will always talk about yesterday. But ultimately, you want to know what is the trend about in general. Now, marketing people will always talk about in general, and sometimes forget that yesterday was really crap. So you need to bring this together. Now, let's say we make this survey together, we generate those insights. These insights might confirm or not confirm what you have thought, but no matter who is right or wrong, in the end, it's the data. The trick is, how will you then later, if you are the salesperson in my example, how will you use the data to turn it actually around in your sales pitch? And how can I use the data which we have discovered together to fine-tune actually my messaging at the beginning? So this is something which needs to be done. And again, that's why I said it needs to be tied together.
There really is that, one is almost to your point that there's a kind of almost a theoretical approach to understanding what the market might need and preparing for that. And the other one is a more kind of practical, getting the kind of information on the ground, feeding that back in to then, refine that process. So it just kind of brings me to an interesting point then. What's the biggest lie marketers tell themselves about how well they understand their process?
Well, it starts over with the first problem, right? Marketing people usually, and I'm not talking about gigantic companies, let's say Salesforce or something like that, but marketing people in general don't talk to the customer, right? So that is a big problem, because ultimately the problem with the customer might be way more stupid than you actually thought it would be. And so marketing people are very often, and I'm talking about good marketing people, right? So not somebody who's just not good at their job. It's the same for salespeople as well. But a lot of marketing people tend to think that it's all in the data. But in the end, the question is, which data are you looking at? And it's the same for questions, right? I can assume you have a problem. I will do a whole survey about that problem. You will answer this survey rightfully so correct. that might confirm all the things I have, but ultimately maybe your problem is with something very different, but I didn't ask you about. And that is something which I discovered actually when I was director of marketing at Smava, which is a big loan comparison site in Germany. And we always assumed, so we compared loans from different retail banks, personal loans, so not mortgages, at the time. And so we assumed, well, everybody has to understand that if you compare your loans, then you will get a cheaper rate instead of if you go to just your home bank, right? Let's say you are in Germany, you go to the Deutsche Bank or Sparkasse, because they will trick you. Now, that's true because you didn't compare. You cannot know if something is good or bad if you don't put it into perspective in comparison to other offers. That is a general thing to do. Now, we assumed, well, every customer will understand that. But that's actually not true. That's assumption one. But then I forced so we tried in all our material to actually explain that we compare, and comparing is better than not comparing. So if you compare and you're smarter, you will save money. Now, I'm not saying that didn't work. It actually worked really well. At the time when I was there, we had a CAGR of 75% over 5 years, right? So it was quite successful. But there's a but. Then I had an epiphany where I decided, well, okay, I will join the sales team and actually listen to the calls for 1 week. And then there were some things which I would never have discovered in data. One of the things was that a lot of our customers actually thought that we were the bank. So they actually asked us, when are you paying us the money? Now, the funny thing is we didn't pay out anything because we are not a bank. We're just comparing. Now, if you then think about this has a huge effect on acquiring leads. Because ultimately, these people who asked this question, they already trusted us because they thought we were a bank. And so they will actually do this comparison. But there will be a lot of people actually don't go to us because they will say, well, the Smava guys, well, they are a bank. I have never heard of them. I believe my Sparkasse. And so that is, on the market side, a huge insight. On the other hand, for the salespeople as well, very similar. We provided sometimes interest rates which were not realistic. So the salespeople then actually came into a conversation with the customer, but then they had to say, well, no, unfortunately, this and this and this is actually different. And it was not about the customer doing something wrong. They provide all the right information. But we actually had a tendency to show always the cheapest thing we could offer. And that is something which doesn't work. So in the end, you have to go as a marketeer. You have to go into that conversation with customers, not as much on a regular basis as a salesperson, obviously, otherwise you cannot do your job. But you have to do it a few times just to get into that rhythm. You can ask all the questions you want to the salesperson, but there's one bias in every marketing person, and that's true for every human on earth, is you will not find the answers of the questions you have not asked. So I can ask you all the questions, but if I never ask you the right question, you might not tell me.
I think that's a great piece of advice about actually sitting in with the sales team, and basically listening to the customer's voice. Really, and I think that's always the hallmark of great marketing, when they can articulate the customer's voice into the product, into their messaging that goes back out to the customer, because then you're really speaking from a position of relevance, which should then create resonance. So, but just again, that just kind of sparked a thought. What marketing discovery technique that, if I can use that phrase, that transformed your sales team's close rate?
There's multiple stories on this. I think maybe one step back, because I wanted to add an addition to the previous point. The marketing team has to learn, first of all, to leave their world of marketing. Right? So they have to go into the front where the salespeople are. And that is very difficult psychologically for a person in the team. Because people will say, well, we do our stuff, they do their stuff. That's not my job, I don't do that. No matter which attitude, people have that to a certain extent, always. But you have to leave your world first. Now, you could argue, why does sales not leave their world first? Now, in the end, marketing is also at the front. It's the first thing people see about your company. So they have to do this first. Then, once they have learned more about the customer, and they refine the stuff, or they create new ideas, if that's an ROI calculator, if that's a pitch deck, if that's a survey, it doesn't matter. Then they have to bring in the sales team. So they have to leave their world to provide feedback, to maybe also not even provide feedback, just share spontaneous opinions, because very often the real insight is in the things you haven't asked. But these are the things which people say between the lines. And so then all of a sudden you discover, we never asked this question, but this guy actually, involuntarily so, actually said something very important, which we should use. But again, marketing has always to leave first. And I know that a lot of marketeers find that unfair, but that's just how it is. That is the number one thing in steering and bringing these teams together. That's essential, because ultimately the VPs are very close knit. That's all fine, but they don't do the job. It's the people underneath which do this job. They have to be connected. And so, one thing to your second question. So one thing we did, and it depends, of course, always on the company. A lot of the companies I've done were more B2C, so there the role is different. But what we did at Chronext, which is a company I was an MD, they sold luxury watches. So marketing basically advertised those watches via different online channels, very strongly, obviously, Google search, paid or non-paid. And then people order a certain watch, and you might pick it up in one of our locations. Now, the salesperson, obviously, will then do a conversation about that. That sales cycle is not as long as in B2B sales. But of course, if you buy a watch which is 20,000 euros, that's not a 5-minute conversation. So that's an hour and a half conversation where people drink some champagne, talk about their lives, whatever, and then hopefully in the end take their credit card and pay that bill. So that is the normal setting. Now, what we discovered also, again, by call listening, and that's again important, we realized that the number one question is different per stage. So the number one question when you order a watch is actually to say, okay, do you have that watch on stock? And then the other question is has it been verified? How good is the state? Whatever. So because people have a big fear that they would buy a super clone, a fake watch, basically. That's the biggest fear in that stage. But once you come to the office or the pickup location, the question changes. And what marketing people are actually really good at is actually discovering that core question. Salespeople are very often focusing on the closing, which is normal because they have a job to do. It's very hard to then also focus on the main question. So I made my people actually sit in these conversations. So they played the salesperson too. And one thing we discovered there is actually that it's not even about the watch when they are sitting there. It's just about them. And we discovered one core question, which we then gave to the sales team, and they were very grateful to. So if you would buy a watch from me, I will not ask you why you wanted that Rolex Submariner. My opening question is, John, we are very happy to have you here. You want to have some champagne, you will have some champagne, all good. And I will ask you, well, John, why are we sitting here today? It's a very open question. The main reason why people buy a luxury watch, and that's the emotion, is to celebrate something. There's always a live event. They sold their business, their kid graduated, they sold a house, made a good deal, something like that. They got promoted, got a big bonus. There's always certain success. It can be personal or financial. Now, people reply to this question very differently. They have people who just answer the question directly. You will also have people who tell you their whole life. But I can tell you one thing. The person who told you their whole life will buy that watch. So again, that's why both teams have to help each other together. And this is one way to do it, where marketing did this in this case. There's many other stories, but of course in respect of time, where actually sales and vice versa help marketing.
I really like that story. That's something I've heard repeatedly others say about really asking the why and getting to the real reason of it all. In your experience, what discovery question that you've come across, perhaps, over time, that you think every salespeople ask that marketing can't get the answer directly for them?
Well, on the one hand, the example I just gave obviously is in a B2C environment, but it's the emotion. The emotion ultimately is the reason why people buy. And there's a dangerous trend in general in this world today. Through all the technology, the automations, 15 years ago, the rise of performance marketing, people tend to think that it's all in the data. And it actually, there is a lot in the data. But ultimately, people don't only buy because of a functional benefit. People buy anything because of an emotional benefit. The functional benefit is there to explain why you are there. The functional benefit is also there to actually differentiate yourself from competition, because your functional benefit might be different than your competitors. even though you might do the same, because there will always be a hack which actually makes you stand out. But in the end, if you want to make people pull the trigger, then people buy the emotion. That's why in the B2C world, we asked, well, why are we sitting here? Because then they buy the emotion. They bought their own story, which is really great. Now in the B2B world, the thing I always ask in networking events. So well, 2 days ago, I spoke at a Salesforce event in Amsterdam, and I had to do like a keynote, 10 minutes on hyper-personalization. But then I sit next to people at a dinner table, and I don't know anyone. I mean, I moved to the Netherlands a few years ago. I don't know any people here. My network is not as large. But I always ask people after the general introduction, well, what is the biggest struggle in your company you have today? And it's a very personal question, but you would be surprised how many people answer this question in utmost detail. People tell you everything. And in a B2B sales cycle, asking kind of this struggle question, maybe in a different variation of this, is the similar version of why are we sitting here today? Because ultimately, people will not buy your tool because they like it. It's because it gives them a competitive edge. It's because it makes them look progressive in the company. It might be because they have a big problem that you need to solve. But then if they solve it, they get the reward. Somehow can be recognition, can be financial, can be progress, can be anything. If you have a founder, then it can just save your company. And there's many, many reasons. But ultimately, asking about the struggle is the question to ask.
That's such great advice, Laurence, because really that kind of encapsulates the power of really good discovery, because in that process, it's an often overlooked area. But there's a saying, and I think you'll know this, that certainly in advertising and marketing, PR communications, the phrase emotion is the potion.
Yeah, it is.
And that, the way you've just explained all that, almost kind of distills down into why getting the discovery process is absolutely crucial, because actually what you're aiming for then is the emotional content.
Yeah.
To really move the needle for the sale.
Curiosity. Curiosity is essential. So if it's one word, it's curiosity. Curiosity makes sure that you don't just stay with the thinking you have. Curiosity focuses you on listening better. It's also an advice actually for salespeople though. And it makes sure that if you stay curious, that you don't just believe that what you believe is right. It makes sure that if you start to talk to people, you listen better, and then you actually think, even if you disagree, actually it forces you to think, what makes this person actually think this way, which is completely opposite to everything I believe in. If you have this curiosity, to your point of the discovery question, you will discover that discovery question much, much, much quicker. And that's why curiosity is key for any marketeer who wants to actually have a successful career.
Laurence, that's a brilliant way to end this discussion. Thank you ever so much for coming on to our little show called the Espresso. You know, it's been a real joy listening to some of the stuff that you've been doing, and congratulations on some of the amazing work that you're doing. And I think we should get you back on another day to talk more about these wines that you seem to be quite fond of.
That's a whole conversation itself. But first of all, John, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast. And I wish you also a lot of success with Merlin. It's amazing what you have been doing. And I love to see your progress every time.
Thank you
Thank you so much.